This is the Education Gadfly Show.
Welcome to the Education Gadfly Show. I'm Stephanie Disler, here to kick things off for this week's episode. Today, we're joined by Eric Tucker, President and CEO of the Study Group, to talk about his first place entry on what it will take for the science of reading laws to succeed. Then, on the Research Minute, David Griffith highlights a study showing that we lose a lot of useful information when test questions get rolled into a single score, and that states could generate better value-added measures of teachers and schools by using all the data they already collect. All this and more on the Education Gadfly Show, starting now.
Hello, this is your host, Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, here at the Education Gadfly Show and online at fordhaminstitute.org. Now, please join me in welcoming our special guest for today, Eric Tucker. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, also joining us as always, my co-host, David Griffith.
Hey, Mike. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, well, first of all, I hope that both of you had great Thanksgiving weekends. This is going to be coming out on Wednesday, so maybe by the time people are hearing this, Thanksgiving is going to feel long, long away. But I hope that was good for both of you. I should say it was good until Ohio State beat Michigan. But you know, it was sad for me as a Michigan fan, but you know, it was their turn. We had won 4 games in a row in the big game, so I got to give it to them. We'll do that. Like they get to win every 4 or 5 years, and we win the others. That's something that I can live with. So got to get that in there, David. David loves my sports references,
especially the ones that have to do with the Midwest, Mike.
Yes. Well, you're right, David. It does have to do with the Midwest. I like to remind people of my roots and Fordham's roots in the Midwest. Well, Eric, we are super excited to have you here today. Eric is the CEO and president of the Study Group, but perhaps most importantly, he and his co-author, Edmund W. Gordon, won this year's Wonkathon. Congratulations, Eric.
Thank you. I thought most importantly was being a part of the inaugural class of the Emerging Education Policy Scholars.
Okay. Well,
those many years ago.
And that is, man, we're going way in the Wayback Machine with that one. So I love it. But look, the Wonkathon this year was crazy. We do this every year. I think it's something like 10th or 11th time we've done this. And usually we get, 8, 10, 12 submissions. This time, 48 posts, really good ones, meaty ones that people must have spent days and days and days working on, all around the topic of what do we need to do to get the implementation of the science of reading right. And I take the fact that there was such an overwhelming response to mean that people really care about this topic. And at least, unlike in some other reforms, there's a huge awareness that implementation is where it matters, right? Now, the challenge is, how do we go from that recognition to actually doing something about it, acting like it matters, doing the hard work? And in this post that won you the Wonkathon, you and your co-author, Edmund W. Gordon, who, by the way, I hope it's okay for me to point out, is 104 years old. Incredible, Dr. Gordon, so incredible. That this post that you wrote dug into the issue of assessments and how we need to make sure those are synced up with science of reading implementation. So let's talk about all of that in Ed Reform Update. Well, Eric, I'm so glad that you wrote about assessments in the science of reading space. It is a topic that we care a lot about here on the show. Listeners have heard me say a million times that I think it's nuts that we don't have state testing in grades K to 2, and that we don't hold elementary schools accountable for progress from grades K to 2. This is half of elementary school and probably the more important half. We don't start measuring those things till grade 3. However, as you point out in your post, there's still a lot of testing going on. And a lot of that happens under the guise of screeners. But so why don't we start there? And again, I know you didn't really get into this question whether there should be state mandated tests in those grades or accountability. You're really talking about how you can make sure that the people implementing the science of reading at the local level have the data that they need to know whether it's working and whether mid-course corrections are needed. But tell us about the landscape today. Like what does it look like out there in the country in terms of these screeners and these assessments that are being used around early reading?
Yeah. So blessed to work over this last 3 years with Professor Edmund Gordon, my 104-year-old co-author and friend, and everything from his kind of founding role in the design and launch of Head Start to the last 40 years advocating for assessment in the service of learning is reflected in this piece. I'd say the crux of our position is that states are facing a task right now as they implement new science of reading laws that's analogous to Netflix in 2007. So I'm old enough to, cherish my memory with Netflix as a DVD rental service that would reliably and have a quality catalog to deliver movies by mail. And they kept that business model, even as they embraced a future of streaming services, which had the potential to add a layer of personalization, of usefulness, of usability. But it was critical that they not abandon what was already in place as they pivoted there. And for me, the analogy is we have these state level, accountability systems and testing systems, and things like screeners. And there's three big recommendations that we make about how to build upon what's already in place, even as we move towards a future. So we think it's critical that we move, the first recommendation is moving from single score verdicts about young people to balanced assessment. Second, from we need to learn to improve, so practical measures to inform ambitious teaching of reading. And third, embracing that every reader learns to learn differently, and that there's a lot of variation, and that customization powered by safe artificial intelligence has a potential. So really, building upon grade level reading expectations, state exams, and approaches grounded in the science of reading towards systems with the capacity to inform and enhance teaching and learning. Building upon quality screeners for grades K through 3 and robust professional development systems towards instructionally useful assessment and practical measurement that's oriented towards improving reading across pre-K-8, so a wider grade band, and building upon some of the stuff we know about personalization, like multi-tiered systems of support and universal design for learning, towards how we might do person-specific interventions with AI.
So, Eric, but help me understand, because look, I'll be honest. When I hear about screeners, I just feel like this is something the science of reading world knows a lot about. I don't know a lot about it. I mean, what are these tests? Are these state mandated tests? I mean, or are we talking about dibbles? Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, so we use a whole range of things to screen reading ability. And at a top tier, right, there's a handful of companies, with products like Renaissance Learning or the Curriculum Associates, suite of tools, or the NWA MAP suite of tools. There's kind of a, in most systems, so 80 or so percent of systems around the country, one of a handful of screeners is taken 2 or 3 times, sometimes 4 times a year, in order to take temperature about how things are going. And then as you have concerns about a particular domain, decoding or, comprehension, then you would add in layers of screeners in order to get a better understanding.
Okay, so all right, that's fair. So we're talking about MAP, we're talking about iReady, Renaissance Learning. Okay, so basically, which we're familiar with, of course, all the way through elementary school into middle school in many cases, sometimes in high school, which, by the way, really drives me crazy when it happened for my kids, because I didn't seem like they were using it at all by the time you got to high school. But in elementary school, yeah, you want to see, especially on reading, but math too, how kids are doing and make mid-course corrections. All right, so you're saying to on top of that, to make sure that we've got this balanced assessment system, right? And I would assume that you're picking the right companies' products that align with the curriculum that you're trying to teach, right? I mean, there's a lot of talk about we have these lists now that states have developed, oftentimes based on the Ed Reports list of saying these are the approved science of reading programs. You've got to pick one of these reading programs, or else you don't get you don't get the state money, or maybe you're breaking the state law. You've got to do these things. But I assume then it's important that these assessments are connected so that everything's coherent. That makes sense.
Yeah, that they focus where the high quality instructional material focus, so that your that alignment means that the information is instructionally useful.
Okay.
And I would add that a lot of times we test in order to get a description of status, but that's kind of a 2001 model, right? Focused on design model, focused on status, with kind of an engine under the hood that's a kind of 80s and 90s psychometrics. And a piece of what we need to move towards is, what is a 2026 model of assessment looks like? And a part of our argument is, in order to be instructionally useful, we need to have insight on learning processes, not just a kind of post-mortem verdict on whether they got there or not.
Okay. Right. And when you say status, like, are they proficient or not?
Proficient today,
Proficient.
not proficient today, or even they're a 213, right? And, if you're an educator, you have a kind of snowstorm of data saying this person is a 17 on this scale and a 243 on this scale. But those aren't particularly actionable insights.
Right. You want to get under the hood, like you said. David, what do you think as you read this Wonkathon winning post?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm getting Eric here. I don't think you're saying necessarily that we need more testing. It sounds like your principal concern is that we use the information differently. Is that fair?
Yes, and that what we're asking from these systems is different. So on the more testing question, Scott Marion writes one of the pieces, the chapters that we cite from the Handbook for Assessment in the Service of Learning, which we just published a free, open volume, 90 authors contributed. Scott Marion has this analogy around turning on your high beams of your headlights in a snowstorm, that more information can be blinding. It can be, the glare can decrease the degree to which you actually have actionable insight. But it's something along the lines, because again, our position is let's keep the current system while we upgrade. So we should still, if we're Ford Motor Company, be selling the Ford F-150. But we also, in leaning into the Ford F-150 Lightning, there's a set of features. In that case, it's electric. There's added navigation and sensors and kind of moving towards self-driven cars. I'm kind of silent on the question about whether the feature that will matter the most is, new battery technology or kind of self-driving, car technology for the upgrades. But there is this way in which moving towards 2026, when we're talking about implementation for the future, we can't be resting on design principles that made sense 25 years ago. We need to be kind of looking at what enhancements will be more useful and usable, will produce information that's more useful and usable for educators, for learners themselves, and for those managing systems, and parents who are making choices about systems.
Okay, so what is the weak link? I mean, when you're looking at, presumably you say there's this snowstorm of data, right? Is it that the sort of principals or districts or test companies are not packaging it in a way that teachers can use, or is it that teachers themselves don't? The information is there, but they just don't know what to do with it. Which of those is sort of closer to your position, I guess?
Yeah. So current science of reading, including kind of state testing approaches in the assessment domain, have some advantages, right? The focus on high standards and high expectation, on transparency for families, on data disaggregation by subgroups. Those systems have intentions which are important, but they've fallen short on the potential to make teaching better and to drive better decision making for learners. And so here it's emphatically what we're saying isn't that teachers have useful information, but they're not using it. We're functionally saying that instructionally useful assessment is a different thing than we set out to create in 2001. And in order to get to instructionally useful assessment, we need to measure what matters most, not just what's easy to measure. We need to leverage emerging technologies so we have richer and more useful insights. And we need to prioritize solutions that are optimized for being useful and usable for educators and learners.
All right. We will need to leave it there, but very well said, Eric. Again, Eric Tucker, CEO and president of the study group. You should check out his and Edmund Gordon's Wonkathon winning post. It's called Science of Reading 2.0 Assessment in the Service of Learning as the Backbone of Science-Powered Reading Improvement. And if you are hungry for more, I have good news for you people, because on December 4th at 3 p.m., we are going to have a webinar talking all about the Wonkathon and the science of reading. It says implementation is where it's at. What's next for the science of reading? Again, December 4th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Check it out on the Fordham Institute website. Eric will be a part of that, which we are so excited about. Eric, thanks so much for joining us.
Go Blue.
Go Blue. All right. Now it's time for everyone's favorite, David's Research Minute. David, welcome back to the show.
Hey, I feel like I just left.
That's where we're at. Hey, but I think we only have a few more weeks of this, of you doing these double headers until Amber returns.
Yeah, that's right. We are in the home stretch here, and I'm very much looking forward to it, and looking forward to a more interesting research minute, honestly, when we can have a three-way discussion instead of just you and me batting it back and forth.
Yeah. All right, but we can still be pretty interesting, just the two of us, I think. Let's prove that it is so, David. What do you have for us this week?
Yes, thank you very much. This week, we will be discussing a new Ed working paper by Jesse Brune, Michael Gilrain, Jens Ludwig, and Sendil Mullainathan. Apologies to everyone as usual. The title of the paper is Do Test Scores Misrepresent Test Results? An item-by-item analysis. In this paper, the authors argue that much of the data collected in education is effectively thrown away. After all, students answer individual test questions, but administrators and researchers typically only see aggregate performance. For example, they might see average test scores, or percentile ranks, or the three-parameter item response theory aggregator, which I know is Mike's personal favorite. So to explore this issue further, the authors analyzed 1.3 billion student item responses from 5 million Texas students who enrolled in grades 3 through 8 between 2012 and 2019. More specifically, they show three things, and I'm going to take them one at a time. First, they show that there is additional information in the item level data that is not contained in average test scores. Now, that might seem obvious, but the authors are able to sort of put some numbers on this. So to show this, what they do is they rank order students based on their overall performance, as well as their performance on specific subcategories of the test. And as they point out, if a single ability measure, like an average test score, captures all the information on the test, then you would expect that rank ordering by the overall score and the subcategories would give you approximately the same results. However, they show that the actual rank correlation of student performance in a given test subcategory with the overall test score is about 0.75. In other words, overall performance is strongly but not perfectly correlated with performance on individual test items. They didn't do something similar with teachers. They ranked teachers based on their value added on an aggregate achieve measure, and then they show that they compare that ranking to teachers' rankings of value added on individual test items. And they show that for teachers, the average rank correlation of these individual items is just 0.66. In other words, value added to average test scores is not at all perfectly correlated with value added to individual test items. Okay, so far so good. But this is where it gets interesting. The second thing that the authors show is that this additional information is actually pretty relevant for the student outcomes that education decision makers seek to optimize. And this is kind of their key insight, is that many of the things that we are trying to do as education reformers are boil down to predictions. So, for example, we think that teacher value added matters, right? We think that teacher quality matters. So we use teacher value added to try to identify the best and worst teachers. And then we sort of make decisions based on our predictions about how teachers are going to affect their students without actually ever necessarily seeing those long-term effects on students. So the authors dig into this and show that if you look at the sort of individual test items, that item level data could help us better identify teachers and other inputs that can help students. For example, they demonstrate that the item level data can help us better identify the teachers who are predicted to be in the bottom 5% of the value added distribution in terms of predicted future outcomes for their students. More specifically, they show that value-added measures based on aggregate data disagree with the more powerful item-level predictions about half the time when it comes to class failure, disciplinary infractions, high school graduation, and college attendance. In other words, an aggregator like a test score average is not actually the best way of predicting these outcomes. That brings us to their third insight, which is that information that comes from specific item level responses can be made practically useful for schools. Again, they point out many education decisions hinge on predictions about future student outcomes. And these decisions often involve assigning students, teachers, schools, or even entire school systems to some intervention based on some rank ordering of the expected outcome of interest. And the authors argue that anything that was able to systematically improve that prediction process would be worth doing. This brings us to one final methodological challenge that they highlight, which is that the items on a given test change from year to year. So if you want to create a predictor based on historical test data, you have to connect the questions from past exams to new unseen questions. So to do this, the authors offer what they call a proof of concept implementation of their idea. They basically batch the items on the tests based on how teachers' ability to boost student performance on those items. So, for example, if several items move together, that would be evidence that they are capturing some underlying construct that maybe means they should be batched together. And finally, using this process, they show that identifying the bottom 5% of teachers in the distribution of graduation value added based on aggregate test scores is less effective than using these item level categories. And more specifically, they show that they can boost the impact of the policy on student outcomes by 21% if they use this additional information to better identify high and low value added teachers. So, what does it all mean? The authors argue that given how inexpensive it is to store, transmit, and analyze these sort of additional item level data, large gains could be had in education by simply using all the data that we already collect more effectively.
Woo! As soon as they also figure out how the heck to explain this to any human, maybe they're writing for the AIs. Hey, good job, David. But man, this is complicated. And I'm trying to understand it. I mean, in some ways, it sounds like bad news, which is that our value-added estimates of teachers' impacts on kids is not as predictive as we hoped they were, right? And that, especially if you compare sort of test score value added to these longer-term outcomes like graduation and things like that, but that we can make them better by using more of these data, which we have which is technologically feasible.
Yes, I don't think it's so much that our current value-added measures aren't as good as we think they are. It's simply that we are leaving information on the table, right? I mean, this fundamental intuition, I think, is pretty well, it's intuitive, right? If you take a whole bunch of test scores and you just collapse it down into a single average, right? Like you got a 93 instead of getting all this information about which specific items you did well on, you're throwing away a lot of information. And what the authors are basically saying is, if we kept that information and smart, eggheads did a little bit more work, they could use that information to make teacher value added better, to make school value added better, basically to make any form of test-based prediction more effective.
No, and this is where it gets really important. I mean, the way you were describing it, it kept making it sound like this could have a big impact. And I kept thinking to myself, yeah, if we actually ever use teacher value added data anymore, but I'm not sure, it's rare that we do because teacher evaluation crashed and burned and politically is challenging. On the other hand, I would say school value added is still something we do pay a lot of attention to in at least a bunch of states that have some kind of grade for progress over time, like in Ohio, where we've got the SAS value added data metric, which is kind of a black box. We don't really know what happens inside of that box. But if we can make that better, and more precise, then it would be important because, for example, in Ohio, we reward charter schools that are making a lot of progress, and we want to make sure we are rewarding the right schools.
Yeah, I was kind of going back and forth on it, right? On the one hand, it sounds incredibly technocratic, right? Like we're going to keep these massive item level data files, right? And then researchers are going to do something that nobody fully understands, let's be honest, and sort of squeeze out another drop or two of efficiency from all these measures. It's hard to get too excited about that. But on the other hand, they make the point that, we're spending millions and millions of dollars already, billions probably, to take these tests, right? And we do it every year. And there's something a little bit crazy about just taking the data and just chucking it out the window, chucking, more than half of it out the window in an era when I said 1.3 billion responses. That's nothing to an AI, right? This is not, it's not actually it doesn't cost that much, at least to just keep these data on file and, make them available to researchers. That seems doable to me.
Yeah.
I guess I think there's also a sort of lurking question here about which outcomes we care about, and I probably didn't do a good enough job of explaining the study to get at this. But I guess the benefit of saying math value added or ELA value added to average test scores is that everybody it knows what you're talking about, right? And you can kind of say, well, it's good if you boost, value added to reading or value added to math without saying exactly how it correlates to your particular favorite outcome. I think that if we're going to move beyond that, right, and we're going to say, all right, we're going to break it down and we're going to try to get more granular so that we can do a better job of boosting these outcomes that we care about, it raises the question of exactly which outcomes we care about, right? And it requires a level of consensus about what it is we're trying to accomplish that is sort of elided or evaded by talking about value added to average scores.
Well, and of course, it makes me wonder too about the individual items. Like, does this mean that we then can look on a test and say, okay, these particular items and therefore these particular constructs seem to be especially predictive, right? So it's not only like, oh, if you do well in math, you're more likely to graduate high school, but if you do well in this kind of math, you're more likely to graduate high school or go to college or graduate college. That's pretty cool.
It's cool. It also, it's also complicated because one of the things I didn't get into is that, that we can do that. And unfortunately, the items that predict graduation aren't necessarily the items that predict, discipline rates or failure in the course. In other words, there's no like simple answer that is, about which items matter most that is identical for all of the different outcomes.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so, well, I think it potentially, I don't think it fully solves the mysteries of education research, but I think it is relevant to many of the things that we struggle with, right? Like, why does this intervention seem to matter for high school graduation, but then have no, apparent impact on college persistence, right? Things like that, I think are probably partially explained by this sort of thing, right? There's stuff going on under the hood, and we're treating it as all as, oh well, if you do better on reading, you must be able to do better on all of these outcomes.
Yeah.
And it's just not true.
Yeah. Well, and if there were one construct, that explained, that predicted everything, we'd be like, oh, we could have a very short test. Just test that one construct, and the rest wouldn't matter. And so, I mean, it's right. I mean, it's not surprising. I mean, you get more information if you test a broader set of skills, probably, but some might be more important than others. And some might be more important to, say, high school graduation, which is really about getting low achievers over a pretty low bar. It might be a different set that's about college completion, that's about a much higher level of skills, right? And a smaller number of kids, but getting them to that point. So, anyways, I want to know the findings from that study. I would like to know, well, tell me which of those constructs are showing up as being most predictive for these different outcomes. I think that would be pretty cool.
And I think the authors would say, yes, let's do that. And in order to do that, maybe the clearest takeaway is that state departments of education should be demanding this information, and they should be keeping it on file, because it wouldn't be that difficult.
All right. Well said. Thank you, David. I think I get it. So we'll consider that a success. Again, especially after a long holiday weekend. That is all the time we've got, though, for this week. So until next week.
I'm David Griffith.
And I'm Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, signing off.
The Education Gadfly Show is a production of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, located in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit us online at fordhaminstitute.org.